Hi everyone, Jim here. Welcome to my channel, Mystery and Mayhem. Today I'll be talking about Robert E. Howard's Queen of the Black Coast and certain adaptations of the story. We are still in September, and it is Cimmerian September, which was created by Michael K. Vaughan over on his channel, and it's a fantastic reading event if you're a Conan fan, if you're a Robert E. Howard fan, and I've really been enjoying it. I've been enjoying everybody's posts that they've been doing for Cimmerian September. I've been watching Grammaticus and Michael K. Vaughan and others, and it's just a fantastic reading event. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about the Queen of the Black Coast and a few of the comic book adaptations that there have been. But first of all, we'll talk about the actual story, Queen of the Black Coast. I just read it in this edition, Conan of Cimmeria, the Ace paperback edition. Now this version in this book, slightly edited by L. Sprague de Camp, but it also appears in its pure form in this book, The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. And it's The Queen of the Black Coast is a great story, probably one of Robert E. Howard's greatest Conan stories, and it features his character Beilit, the sheep pirate of the Tigris, the ship that was a scourge of the Black Coast. And she really is a fantastic character, and the story itself is probably, as I said, one of the best Robert E. Howard Conan stories. So the character of Beilit and Conan met in the story where he was in the port of Argos, and he had appeared in court to kind of snitch on a fellow person that he knew, like a friend of his, and the court wanted him to basically snitch on his friend, and Conan refused to do so. And so what he did is he took his sword and he cleaved the judge's skull, and he escaped on the prefect's horse, and he rode down to the docks, and he ended up on a trading ship. He kind of forced his way on the trading ship, but the captain of the trading ship was happy to have him because of Conan's strong right arm, and he was able to defend the ship. But in the process of working on this ship for the captain of the trading vessel, they ended up being raided by the sheep pirate Beilit of the pirate ship the Tigris, and in doing so, the entire crew and the captain of the trading vessel that Conan had been serving on were wiped out. And he ends up on the deck of the Tigris. He's surrounded by the black crew members with spears and swords, and he's about to be skewered. You know, I mean, he's going to fight to the death, but he's overwhelmed, and he's probably going to die. But the sheep pirate Beilit steps in and stops her crew members from killing Conan, and that basically was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. They fell in love or lust, you know. I mean, you could call it lust, and it was a matter of convenience for Conan. But I think over the time that they spent together, they did fall in love, and Beilit became the great love of Conan's life, probably the only great love of Conan's life. It could be argued that in the story The Hour of the Dragon, that Conan had fallen in love with Zenobia and he wanted to make her his queen, but in my opinion that was more a matter of necessity. He was a king, he needed a successor, and she was available to him, and she was a strong-willed person, so he decided to take her as his queen. But I mean, I think Beilit was probably the only real love of Conan's life. And The Queen of the Black Coast, the story is a fine example of Robert E. Howard's fatalistic outlook on life, and that outlook that he injected into his stories that made them so so vibrant and brutal and just amazing to read. He put himself into every story, and that's what he was. He was just had this nihilistic point of view in life and in his writing, which made his stories very special. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another prose novel with Belit as the character, and that would be Paul Anderson's Conan the Rebel. Now, in this one, Paul Anderson kind of creates an origin for Belit, where she is a daughter of sea traders, and her and her brother basically are kidnapped by the Stygians, and her brother's brutalized, and the whole story kind of has Conan going to save her brother. Now, oddly enough, even though she is a character in this book, she's not really a main character. She kind of disappears after she's introduced, and another female character kind of takes over the central position in the story, and then she kind of comes in at the end. So that's a little bit of a critique, critical, thought about this book, because I think she should have had a larger part in this story. Sorry, my phone stopped on me there. So as I was saying, it was a good book. Paul Anderson has a good grasp on the culture, the geography, the people of the Hyborian Age, and it was an enjoyable book. But Conan sometimes throughout didn't really act like Conan, and that's a common critique of these pastiche novels, because nobody really could get Conan like Robert E. Howard. Some people have come close, some writers have come close, but there's always that little bit that throws you off when you're reading these pastiches. But if you want to learn more about Belit and one of her origins, you might want to read this book. But there was another origin story written by Roy Thomas, which was written before this. It's quite possible that this had been written before Roy Thomas wrote his origin in the Marvel Comics. He might have adapted this one, because Roy Thomas preferred to adapt these pastiche stories and Robert E. Howard stories, because in his mind he didn't want to confuse the readers, so he would tend to adapt stories that had already been done in prose, instead of just creating something that contradicted what happened in those stories. But that being said, even though Roy Thomas did adapt the Robert E. Howard stories, the Elsbreg de Camp stories, he took other authors who had fantasy characters and adapted them into Conan stories. For instance, The Flame Winds by Norval W. Page, he adapted that into a Conan story. And he's been criticized for that, Roy Thomas, but I think comic books are kind of a different animal, and I think it can be excused in that instance, because, you've got to crank these stories out. At the time, Roy Thomas, he was writing Conan the Barbarian, writing stories for Savage Sword of Conan. He had to come up with ideas where he could find them. So he would adapt a lot of stories, but he also created stories on his own out of whole cloth, and he did a brilliant job at it. I mean, Roy Thomas is probably one of the greatest comic book writers in the business to this day, and he was very, very detailed, had a great eye for continuity. For instance, in The Queen of the Black Coast, all the crew members were wiped out. But in Hour of the Dragon, which was written later, Conan ran into some members of the Tigris. So those two facts kind of contradicted one another, and Howard didn't think about continuity like that too much. I mean, to him, Conan was a warrior standing over his shoulder, telling him tales from his past. So Howard didn't worry too much about that stuff, but Roy Thomas did. So what he did in the comic book, a few issues before the events, the final events of Queen of the Black Coast, he had some of the crew members leave the ship and go elsewhere, so that 20 years later down the road, Conan was able to meet them, and they would recognize him as Amra, the mate of their mistress, Beilit, Queen of the Black Coast. So anyway, that's a story for another time, that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about some of the comic adaptations of Queen of the Black Coast, and what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to start with the most current one and work my way back. And this really is an adaptation, but there are scenes in Titan Comics' story, Thrice Marked for Death, where there's actually flashbacks, like Conan in a fever dream is having flashbacks about his time with Beilit. And it's brilliantly done. And anybody who hasn't read these Titan Comics books, they're not necessarily adaptations, but the chapter headings in this are again flashbacks. This really is a brilliant series. They take a lot of their inspiration from the early Marvel Conan comic books. There's let's see if I'm gonna show you a quick scene if I can find it. I'm going to flip through it right here, and it's a tribute to the scene where Conan finds Beilit strung up from the yardarm. And it's taken from the Marvel comic book almost exactly, but just, Doug Braithwaite did the art for this. And he's just like brilliant. I mean, just great artwork in this. I should have bookmarked it. There we go. It's right at the beginning, of course. That panel right there. And I'll show you the panel from the Marvel comic that kind of takes its inspiration from. And so that just lends this whole story that much more gravitas, and it ties in, the Conan we know with this, this new Titan Comics Conan, but they're doing such a great job. The art has been phenomenal. Robert De La Torre, Doug Braithwaite, and they're really taking Conan seriously and doing it right. And I don't have a lot of negative criticism against what they've done so far. So Dark Horse, on the other hand, they did an adaptation of Queen of the Black Coast. And let me get these in order here. You can find their adaptation in these 4 trade paperbacks, number 13, 14, 15, and 16. And what they did, and what Marvel Comics did before them, is they took the Queen of the Black Coast story, they kind of split it in half, and they added story in between the 2 parts, like from when Conan met Beilit, and their adventures together, and then to the final events of the Queen of the Black Coast. So that's what the writer Brian Wood did in this series. And this series was good. Like I'm a fan of Brian Wood. I like his writing, but the entire series and the artwork was kind of up and down for me. And there's times in it where Conan kind of didn't really act according to how he should. And again, the artwork was sometimes okay, and other times not very good. And this kind of made the mistake too. And again, it's excusable in comic books, where Conan was sent to Cimmeria, and you saw him in flashbacks as a little boy, and he met other Cimmerians. And I know that's something you really don't want to do in a prose Conan story that you might be writing. But in comic books, I think it's an excusable thing, because you've got stories to write. You need to take the ideas where you find them. So I'm going to show you the covers of these ones. This is the first one, The Queen of the Black Coast. And this one is called The Death. The Nightmare of the Shallows. And then it's wrapped up in The Song of Beilit. Now, in Miller and Clark's chronology, and the chronology that Roy Thomas used in the Marvel Comics, about 3 years of time happened between the beginning and the final events of the Queen of the Black Coast. And the Dark Horse comics don't really specify whether it's 3 years or not, but you do get the impression that time, time is flowing, time is going by, so it quite possibly was meant to be 3 years, because as I said, in this series they travel to Cimmeria and they have other adventures which could very well take 3 years to happen. But in the Marvel series, it was very specifically 3 years, because again, how brilliant Roy Thomas was is he had it all planned out. His plan was to introduce Beilit in number 58 of Conan the Barbarian, and then in issue number 100, he had the plan that would be the final events of the Queen of the Black Coast. And then he had 40 issues and 3 years of comic book issues where he could just tell their story and unfold the story and do foreshadowing and flashbacks and tell Beilit's origin, which is different than the Paul Anderson origin. And I much prefer what Roy Thomas did for that. And he was brilliant in that way. And it's really my favorite run of comic books. The Conan comic books was that 58 and 100. And Roy Thomas was very smart in doing that, because it accomplished two things. By having Beilit in all those comics, he made the reader love her as a character, and so it meant much more, when the final events happened, that they would feel her loss. Because she becomes such a mainstay of the comic, and people enjoyed her as a character. And then the final events happen where, no spoilers. I mean, she died, obviously. I mean, anybody who's read the story knows what happened. So they would feel her loss that much more. And the second thing that it accomplished, it just it opened up the doors for more story ideas. Again, it's comic books. You're always looking for ideas to carry the series forward, and that just gave him an open avenue for more stories to tell with Beilit and Conan, and it just opened up more possibilities for him. So that's I think what his reasoning was behind that whole decision that he made. So I have these Dark Horse published, they published the Marvel comics. They reprinted the Marvel comics, and I have these trade paperback editions, and the whole Queen of the Black Coast saga is in these 5 editions, and this is volume 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and it starts with the beginning of Queen of the Black Coast, and the last one here are the final events of the Queen of the Black Coast. And then all the stories, the 40 issues and 3 years worth of stories, are told within these other books, and I'll show you the covers of them. So that's volume 8. And these are wonderful editions, but the one critique I have is they didn't print the covers. They didn't print the covers in these until volume 15. Then they started printing the covers, but they're still wonderful to have. That's Riders of the River Dragons, Volume 9. Their naming conventions were a little weird on these. They'd take a small kind of unknown story that really wasn't, pertaining to the story going on in these volumes, and title it that. And I don't understand why their naming convention was like that. The Dance of the Skull and Other Stories, Volume 11. But just great. And that's The Beast King of Abombi, and that's Volume 12. and that's the whole Queen of the Black Coast saga in those 5 volumes. And you can also, you know, I mean, these are probably a little harder to find, but you can find it in the omnibus editions, which I have down here. I don't know if you can see them. Or you can buy the Conan the Barbarian Marvel Epic books to get the whole saga. Yeah, and it's highly recommended. As I said, that's like my favorite run of comics of all time. Beautiful artwork by John Buscema and Ernie Chan and other inkers. I think Steve Gann did some inking, and others. Just fantastic. But there's also another adaptation that I want to mention that I'm kind of going out of order here now, but Blaze Comics adapted the story of the Queen of the Black Coast. Now, these were reprints of French comics, and Blaze Comics took them and you know, translated them into English and reprinted them in their own comics. And yeah, so Queen of the Black Coast appears in this one with some interesting artwork. I should actually show you some of the artwork that John Buscema did in the series, but yeah, here I'm going to show you some of the John Buscema artwork in these editions. Like, that's just iconic right there. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. The coloring, they recolored these, and the coloring's not bad. You know, I don't know what I prefer, whether the coloring from the actual comics or this. They did a pretty good job on it, so I can't really complain. There's a nice shot of Belit and Conan. And let me get to the issue number 100. Was a very special issue and one of my treasured possessions. And there's the splash page for Death on the Black Coast, which was the final appearance of the character Belit in Marvel Comics. So I probably missed some things. I wanted to talk about a lot of things, but I get on here and I probably missed a few things. But you know, I wanted to share them with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I really recommend reading the original Robert E. Howard story, The Queen of the Black Coast. And if you're able to, I mean, I think the Epic comics are still available online. I know Titan is reprinting the omnibus volumes, so I mean, you can get them. They're a little pricey though. So yeah, good luck with that. But as I said, highly recommended. But if you just really want the pure Robert E. Howard words story, these are still available as far as I know, and fairly inexpensive. This is a 3-volume set. The Coming of Conan, The Bloody Crown of Conan, and The Conquering Sword of Conan. And those 3 volumes have all of Robert E. Howard's stories that he wrote in his lifetime on Conan in those 3 volumes. So that's it for me. I will try to post another one very soon before September's over. But if not, I will see you guys soon. You guys take care. Keep reading.